Hi, I'm Don Cantor, former co-director of JLIC at Johns Hopkins University and current director at the Richmond Jewish Learning Experience in Richmond, Virginia. And this is the Torah JLIC podcast. JLIC supports thousands of young Jews in their college years and beyond, providing them with the nourishment they need to sustain an upward trajectory of Jewish commitment and growth as they enter the broader world. And the animating engine of that effort, that has always been and always will be Talmud Torah. High-level Torah learning, creative, meaningful, and attuned to the realities of where our students actually are. On the Torah JLIC podcast, we hope to share some of that Torah with you. Thanks for listening. This is the first episode without my trusty co-host, Rabbi Alex Ozar. And while I do miss him, the show must go on. In this episode, I interview Rabbi Josh Ross. Rabbi Ross and his wife, Rivka, were of the OG JLIC couples. Rabbi Ross is now the managing director of the OU's College and Young Professionals Division, as well as the executive director of JLIC. I started by asking him how he got to JLIC all the way back when.
I was in yeshiva with Rabbi Schrader Shlita and my wife wrote the very first grant proposal for Rabbi Schrader's vision of putting couples on campuses. I do not have it with me. It was not called JLIC. It was called something really clunky and terrible. Rabbi Schrader is a huge Talmud Chacham, but he's not an expert in snappy names or idioms. And so Rivka wrote this very first grant proposal for Rav Schrader, and my wife had been involved with Jewish student activism in America, which is more impressive than it sounds. And I was very involved with Jewish student activism in Canada, which was easier because it was mostly student-driven and student-led. And we both really liked what Rav Schrader's idea was. This would be a great opportunity to do something fun and sort of reconnect with that world of Jewish student activism and leading Jewish students. So we agreed. We went to Cornell. And that was the beginning of the end. We did Cornell for 3 years, which were absolutely phenomenal. And then at that stage, unfortunately, it was a little too much for our kids. It just, Ithaca, New York is not the hotbed of religious Judaism one might think it is. They don't have any pizza stores. So in some ways it's like Teaneck, but in other ways it's the opposite. And we still loved what we were doing, and we decided we wanted to get on campus. We took Princeton, and we did Princeton for 3 years. And then I would have taken a third campus. I actually was interested in Rutgers because I felt it was going to be a very different shift from the Ivies. I wanted to do just a huge state school. But my wife informed me that we were tired of doing campus work, and that was news to me. But once it was explained to me, I understood that we were indeed tired of doing campus work. Thank God, almost 30 years, and it's been 30 years because I've learned that we are tired of things. It means that I am tired of it too. At that time, my wife actually had gotten really invested in working on a observant or an Orthodox Montessori program, which is phenomenal. And I was really excited to do nothing. And unfortunately, I got sucked back in. Rabbi Elon Haber, who was the executive director at the time, had called me and basically said, would you like to be involved? And I was like, yes, I'd love to be involved. And I think it would be great for me to be an associate director and, work with students and help my directors do what my wife and I did on campus. In 2008, and the economy collapsed. So I basically agreed to this position, and the next day Rabbi Elon Haber called me and said, hey, how about if 20% of your position is fundraising and the rest will be doing all this campus supervision? And I said, okay, I don't really do fundraising, but I'll make it work. And the next day he called me and said, hey, how about if 50% of your job is fundraising? And I was like, I don't know that I signed up for that, but I can try. And then the next day he called me and said, hey, the OU said we can really only hire a fundraiser because the economy's in the tank, and would you like to be a full-time fundraiser for JLIC? And I said no, but by that stage, that was a job I'd already accepted. I met with the commissioner of JLIC at the time, and the head of the JLIC commission at the time, and he was like, I don't think you can get this done. And I was like, I definitely can. And that was actually what made me decide I was going to do this. And so for quite a few years, I did a lot of development with also supervision. And then I was doing all the supervision and all the development. And then slowly we transitioned into finding an amazing development director who has been the blessing of my existence. A few years ago, Rabbi Haber took a very different position in the OU, and unfortunately, nobody fired me, and they promoted me. And now I am the director of the OU's Collegiate Young Professional Division, which is pretty much everybody age 18 to 35. And that includes JLIC, which of course is my heart and soul, and the new ECP initiative, which is primarily young professionals, and IFS, which is the OU's birthright arm. And that is the story, a much longer and uninteresting story than anybody ever wanted to hear. You can edit most of this out. Tachlis, I started in the same yeshiva as Rabbi Schrader. And I mean, Rav Schrader was Rav Schrader. I was a Talmud in yeshiva, and then I did campus and loved it. Like you, Don, I realized that there was never going to be a better job until my wife told me that I, in fact, had realized that there was going to be a better job and that we didn't need to do campus anymore.
But the campus experience was a good one for you.
Phenomenal, Rivka, and I loved it. We loved it. Absolutely. It was absolutely, without a doubt, some of the most fulfilling time that we've ever had, for sure. Yeah. Especially at Cornell, because Cornell, unlike the vast majority of campuses, as you know from your time on campus, Don, is the CJL is the Center for Jewish Living, and it's by students for students. And it's very unique in that most Jewish life on campuses in America happen in some way, shape, or form in conjunction with Hillel. And there is a Hillel at Cornell, and they're doing great stuff. But the CJL is really run by students for students, and it's just an absolutely phenomenal experience. It was perfect for myself and Rifki because, we really were all about Jewish student activism and seeing the students lead from the front. So Cornell was amazing. Our best time ever. Really just the best. Yeah, and then Princeton was great. Princeton was a very different type of experience. It was very enjoyable. There was a wonderful Hillel director who really helped and was really invested in the growth of the Jewish community at large, and we had a great time. We did a lot of great stuff. But, I guess I'm a country boy at heart, and Ithaca, New York is a little bit more country than Princeton, New Jersey.
Do you think that your view of what JLIC's mission is or what its goals are changed from the time that you were on campus to whatever position you find yourself in now?
No, I actually think that's a really great question. I think that the way that we interact with students and what students are looking for or how students relate to their Judaism or campus is definitely changed. I mean, that sort of, goes without saying. But I think that Rabbi Schrader's vision of a couple who are modeling Torah true values on campus and showing what achrayus to your Judaism really means has not changed at all. Again, there are different ways of doing it. Obviously, I'm so old that, I remember printing flyers because there wasn't even Facebook. And now people are like, what's Facebook? That sounds like something old people look at. But at the time, it was very, very new and exciting for some people. So I think that what has changed is the way we work with the community at large. And of course, JLIC has grown tremendously. We're on pretty much every campus in Israel now, as well as America. We have a bunch of different divisions that didn't exist years ago. So I'd say that what we have taken is that pure distillation of believing in the values of Torah, true Judaism, and helping to craft and grow young men and women who are interested in that growth, wherever that is, wherever it means. It can be, you want to be a Gabbai, that's great. You want to be the leader, the future leader of Jewish people, that's great. It doesn't really matter as long as you're taking achrayus and growing. That, for sure, I think is still the bedrock of what we do. And then we have, all these other divisions that help support that or are versions of that are different than the core, here's a married couple on campus. But I think that in the same way, if you look back to the very foundations of Torah true Judaism, by which I mean to say the Torah and Bereshis, I don't think much has changed, right? I think that there needs to be, I understand that they didn't have electricity, but I think that it's about those values and modeling those values. And if you fail to model those values, then you end up in an unsuccessful situation. And if you model those values, you're able to be successful. So how do you model those values, of course, is very different. Is it a podcast, newsletters? I don't know, whatever social media thinks is important at the moment is maybe important. But by the end of the day, it's that sincerity and that belief that has been fundamentally so important. and was really very much what Rav Schrader envisioned at the beginning. And I believe to this day, people will come to me and say, oh, I tend to move more quickly. I'm certainly much more aggressive and certainly much less learned than Rav Schrader. And people are like, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? Why don't you try that thing? I'm like, we're not going away from the couple model. The couple model is the most essential thing. And Don, I'm sure you and Leora know this. JLIC can be a very frustrating job, and I tell this to incoming directors. I probably told this to you guys when you started, because it's not like that. There's no instant gratification, right? You're helping people become more involved as Torah true Jews on whatever level that means, but nobody's going to pick you up and carry you around on your shoulders saying like, yay for that sheer Don, Rabbi Cantor, that sheer changed my life. And that's not to disrespect you, because nobody's ever done that in the history of Judaism, but they will call you years after they graduated and say how you interacted with your wife or how you interacted with the kids changed the way that I relate to my spouse or how I educate my kids. And so I think that that's really just a phenomenal truth, which is that there tends to be a lack of sincerity in the way Jews relate to their Judaism today. And I think that JLIC is at the forefront of modeling that Torah true Judaism in an authentic way. So again, way too long an answer.
But is that what you think Rabbi Schrader's initial vision was?
I wouldn't be totally comfortable talking about what Rav Schrader's official, original vision was. He was just like, look, all these kids go to yeshiva and people invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in a day school experience. And then they're just kind of like, okay, college, good luck, God bless, hope it works out. And shocking nobody, it won't really work out that well. So I think Rav Schrader was just like, why are we abandoning these young men and women after their day school experience, after possibly their gap year? This is like not a healthy way to do things. And because Rav Schrader, I think on some level, deeply understood or related to the idea of a couple being the right way of doing things, because it can't be taken for granted that Rav Schrader over 23 years ago recognized that 50% of day school graduates roughly are women, and 50% of people attending college are women. And women might like to have a conversation with somebody other than the kind of rabbi. And so that was, I think, very much his sense of like, let's get a woman who is a very competent, capable Torah educator who can model Torah true values, but who isn't, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but like isn't just kind of like in the background, as it were. You know what I mean? But is very, very much able to relate to these young women who've been told that the world is their oyster, not literally, because that's not kosher. I don't know. We need to come up with a Jewish version of that. Their world is their salmon. Doesn't sound good. Whatever. And so I think Rav Schrader really felt like it was about continuing. I think, and I don't mean to put words in Rav Schrader's mouth. I think he would have said that it was sort of like about continuing that Beit Midrash educational experience while you're on campus. Like just because you're on campus doesn't mean you shouldn't have an ability to learn and to have chavrusas and chaburas and enjoy being able to continue growing your Judaism. I think that's how Rav Schrader would have seen it. And I think that then evolved into a greater understanding of the fact that having a couple modeling Torah true values is more and more needed on the campuses as years progressed. So I don't think Rav Schrader would disagree with what I'm saying, but I don't know that he would say that when he started this, that was his vision in a vacuum.
Can you elaborate more on what you think the lack of sincerity in people's relation to Judaism is and how JLIC addresses that?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is I would say that it's not that JLIC looks to actively address it so much as that we are able to hire the correct people, thanks to Talatia, thanks to Rav Schrader, making sure that we have couples who are able to sincerely model Torah true Judaism. I think that for far too many years, we've outsourced Judaism, right? There's a whole plethora of reasons for this. I'm not trying to blame any one individual or any one institution, but I think for a very long time now, we have in America outsourced and Canada have outsourced Judaism, which is to say that we send our children to a school who is hiring teachers who may not necessarily be ideologically aligned with our values, and we aren't perhaps modeling it the way we could be at home. And so there's sort of a lack of sincerity there. And again, somebody will listen to this and be like, that's not me. How are you insulting everybody? I'm obviously painting with a broad brush. But I do think that there is truth to the fact that for a long time now, please do leave this in, there's this mindset of like people go off the derech, when they get to secular university. And what I have said and what all our directors will say, and Don, I think you'll agree with this, again, obviously they'll say it in a more professional, nuanced way, but I refer to it as they just go back to the derech they were on to begin with. And so it doesn't matter if you've invested $400,000 or $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 in your kid's education. It doesn't matter if they went to the best yeshiva or seminary. If you are home and it's clear that Shabbat is a drag, and it's clear from a very young age your parents took you to shul to dump you in it's not called childcare, it's called youth groups, right? But it's basically childcare. And you watch your mom in the hallway talking with her friends, and you watch your dad getting wrecked at Kiddush instead of paying any attention to the rabbi's drasha. And then they come home and lunch is kind of like a nivel-pay experience of Lashon Hara and politics. And then everybody's kind of just waiting around Shabbos afternoon till they can look at their phones again. It's fundamentally hard to understand how we expect these young men and women to care. Like, you can't outsource that. I don't understand math. If I did, I don't know, I'd probably be rich or something. I wouldn't be a rabbi. So there's nothing wrong with outsourcing math, right? Like, okay, if you wanted me to teach my kids math, they could count to 20 if they took their socks and shoes off, and that would be embarrassing. But Judaism is not simply an academic experience. Judaism is an emotional experience, and it is a, obviously we can refer to Chaim Soloveitchik's excellent article about rapture and reconstruction, and the idea of is it do you watch what your parents do? Is it modeled? And I'm not going to go into that. Although I think what he said was absolutely spot on and very important. But I think the idea is that if what you see at home is very different than what you're being told, it's one thing if it's an academic subject where it's expected your parents may not have an expertise, and watching your parents not really care. I remember I had to take the bigwigs of the OU around to a campus. And we tried, obviously, to find the right students so that it wouldn't be, an unmitigated disaster. And this young woman was bragging to the heads of the OU about how the school she went to had taught that, I don't remember what the case was, let's just say that heating up soup on Shabbat was usher. And so she went home and told her parents that heating up soup on Shabbat like they did every week on Shabbat day was usher. And her mother freaked out and called the school and told them how that was disgusting and terrible, and they needed to share that there were different positions. And hooray, the school apologized and won. And her parents won. And she was bragging about this as an example of how modern Orthodoxy is what we want it to be. So the long-winded nature of this story is that there's no frame of reference by which you can connect or relate if your parents do things one way and you're learning something another way, and the answer is, well, your parents are right and halacha is wrong. And again, obviously, I'm not getting into a whole nuanced conversation with Kibbutz Avev. There's tons of stuff out there on that. But the idea is that you are only modeling Torah true Judaism is the only way you're going to connect with these students. And that means sincerity. And so one of the big talking points, and I'm sure this will upset many people, the three of them who listen to it. If they're the people who already know me, they're used to it. There's this, we need more spirituality.
Hey, we have more than 3 people listening to this podcast, Rabbi Ross.
Good, amazing. Thank you. I apologize. The 25 to 30 people who listen to this podcast.
I think.
Right. Well, you know what? We don't need to look at the numbers. What's a number anyway? It's all up for grabs. It's all fluid. So the idea is that what I've seen is this big push for spirituality, right? We need more spirituality. We need more of this. We need more of that. We need more dancing and singing. And that's why, things aren't succeeding today. The answer is, of course, that's ridiculous. What you see is when you see that Breslover Rebbe or that individual who's passionate and in love with the singing and the dancing and truly connected to it, right? They're sincerely connected to it. And these young men and women are looking for that sincerity, and this is an example of that sincerity, which is very different than what perhaps they might find by the Rebbe who's just sort of going through the motions of teaching them the daf and moving on with their lives. But it's not that actually spirituality is the issue. I mean, I'm sure it is for some people, is that sincerity is the issue. And so when you can see a young married couple who have gone to secular university, many of whom are very impressive, your wife is a nurse, we have lawyers, we have doctors, we have all these kind of, really incredible, very impressive people who are still in it and believe in it. And it's not like a 9-to-5 job, and it's not like a 3-hour thing. I think that sincerity speaks volumes. And I think there really is a tremendous lack of sincerity that is a huge problem right now. And again, the reason why some of these singing, dancing manias work and others don't is because when you have a bunch of people faking sincerity, it doesn't really last. Whereas if you have individuals who really love this stuff and buy into it, then that's what attracts people. So anyway, so that really is that's what I think. I think what we have is JLIC models toward true Judaism. and the couples model Torah true Judaism. And that's what people really want. And that's why Jews who aren't religious are drawn to JLIC. It's why Jews who are more religious are drawn to JLIC. It's why everybody on campus is drawn to JLIC. It's not necessarily that they agree with us hashkafically, not necessarily that they've bought into what we believe in, but they see that we are really sincere and passionate about this, and we aren't trying to make people more religious, or we don't have this extra hidden agenda. We're just there, and we believe in what we believe in, and when we leave campus, we're going to continue to believe in what we believe in. And I think that is hugely, massively important.
It sounds like it's almost less Torah true Judaism than it is just sincerity.
Well, yes, but one needs to model Torah true Judaism. In other words, you're correct, right? Sincerity goes a long way, right? Shabtai Tzvi sincerely believed. Well, actually, he probably didn't, but he convinced a lot of people he sincerely believed he was a Messiah. So we're not going to go down that road. Sincerity is only valuable as long as it's relating to things that we hold as a value. But you are correct. You do not need to be the greatest gadol or the greatest doctor or the greatest lawyer, right? We have couples of all kinds of different backgrounds. We have absolute geniuses. We have rabbis who've gotten smicha from Ner, rabbis who've gotten rabbinut smicha, we have women who have a very solid education. We have women who are yotzot. We have women who are literally lawyers, for the Israeli Supreme Court. But what we have on all those cases is sincerity. Can all of them give the same level of shear, or all of them interested in the same things? No, but they, by definition, truly believe in Torah true Judaism. And I use that language specifically because I think that, everything else is such a label at this stage. What does modern Orthodoxy mean? Orthodoxy, I'm not interested, and I certainly wouldn't be capable of coming up with a definition if I wanted to, but I feel like Torah true Judaism, it's pretty clear, either you hold by the Torah or you don't. If you don't, I'm happy to have you come to my shiur or hang out or come to my meal, but we're going to be modeling Torah true Judaism.
So I can't say that you heard it here first because, Rabbi Ross, you've been saying Torah true Judaism for a long time, but you definitely heard it here that the new label, or the label Rabbi Ross is trying to get to be accepted, is Torah true Judaism.
Through no fault of my own, I was asked to speak, I'm going to get this wrong, I want to say a group of very high level Latter-day Saints or Seventh-day Adventists. I apologize in advance, but they were at the OU, and it had to do with some of the OU's really important initiatives tied to education and vouchers and whatever it was. And I don't know, maybe Tal was sick that day, maybe somebody had a sense of humor, you should come and speak to them about campus life. And I kept using the language of Torah true Judaism, and they loved it. It was so funny. It was great. It resonated with them immediately. I'm yeah, Torah true Judaism. That's what we model, and they were into it. So I don't know if anybody has ever listened to this who is either a Seventh-day Adventist or is Church of Latter. Are they the same thing? I don't know. I managed to offend your one Seventh-day Adventist listener. Great. Well, so now you see I'm just a bigot. But the point is that if anybody goes around using that language in the Seventh-day Adventist, that's also thanks to me. So you're welcome, religions.
Do you have some Torah in addition to what you've already shared with us?
There are two things that have stayed with me from the very time I was on campus until now. And, Don, you'd asked me earlier, sort of what changed within JLIC or how do we, relate to things. And obviously, you're always changing the way you think about it. I hope people are always changing the way they think about things or perceiving things or how you relate to things. And, what I think made me effective on campus at Cornell wouldn't make me effective now. And there's always that growth and change. But the two things that have stayed truly consistent for me from a Torah perspective, aside from the belief that sincerity is really the key to our success. I mean, the couples are the key to our success, but our couple's true belief in Torah Judaism is twofold. One is, and you've heard me say this a million times, is Rav Hirsch's piece on Yitzchak and Rivka and Yaakov and Esav, and that is tied to another theme of mine, which is proactivity, being proactive. And so, I apologize, it's less of a 3-minute drasha and more of a concept we can explore or not, is the idea that I think that Judaism, going all the way back to the Torah, which is to say, whenever we want to define when does Judaism start with Matan Torah, what does it mean to start the religion? But if you consider the fact that I would assume the reason why all of the Torah is included is because it's relevant, right? Why does Bereshit exist? So we know the famous answer of Rashi. I'm not a big fan of that answer. I think, it has more to do with the fact that Bereshit is about modeling sincere Torah true values, whether or not they are Torah true in the sense that perhaps they didn't have that concept. But I think it's about modeling, how you relate to your spouse and your siblings, etc. We have what I would argue is a bit of a passive tradition, right? We have, unfortunately, a lot of cases of reactive leaders, right? And when the leaders choose to be proactive, the men specifically, it tends to go poorly. It's interesting that when women are proactive, it tends to go better for the most part, but that's like a conversation for a different time. But this idea of proactive Judaism, I think, is unfortunately somewhat missing. I think there's sort of like this idea of passivity. And just kind of like, okay, I'm going to go along and I'll do the mitzvahs. And when I say proactive, I don't mean, go and do the mitzvahs. I'm talking about really choosing to make a choice or to do something above and beyond. Like the daughters of Slavchad, right? They went to Moshe and said, hey, we're not really buying into this. What are we supposed to do? That was proactive. The idea that they would approach Moshe is unique. The idea that Moshe would then go to God is unique. And the fact that God rewards them for asking that question or rewards is praises them for asking that question highlights the nature of proactive being positive. Okay. And so I think the same thing happened with Rav Hirsch and Yitzchak and Rivka. For people who don't know, you should go and look it up. It's very powerful. He bases his ability to say this on the idea of the Ramban, who is equally powerful. And he says that basically the reason why Esav became Edom, became Rome, is because Yitzchak and Rivka failed him as parents in his education. And that instead of, and this is what Rav Hirsch says is beferish, and that we all know, right? The Torah describes Yaakov as an ish tam ba'ohel. So great, he loves sitting and learning and being quiet. We know Esav didn't like that, right? And so what Rav Hirsch says is that Yitzchak and Rivka were kind of like, all right, well, we'll just send them the same day school, right? They'll just sit in the same benches and learn the same thing the same way. And what Rav Hirsch says, which is so true and frankly so brave, given how we sort of art scrollified the whole world now, is they were to blame for that. Right? Esav became Esav and Edom, and he says this because they couldn't think of a better way to educate their son, because they're just like, all right, whatever, send him to yeshiva and we'll move on. And that passive behavior led to, in a couple of days, for those of you who are listening to it later, we're almost at the Tisha B'Av, in a couple of days led to the destruction of the temples. And so that's like a very weighty thing to say. Right? So nobody's suggesting they need to shoulder the blame in the sense that, they're inherently responsible the way any of us are inherently responsible for things we're not aware of our actions. But that's huge. And the same idea of being proactive, I think, is huge. And these are the two things that I really believe in. Rav Schrader, like a sweet Rav, very learned, was in the Rav Salvation Shir from a very young age, made Aliyah young. There's nothing that suggests that he should have created JLIC. But he recognized that there was a problem and that nobody was addressing it. And he just kind of did it, which is insane because there's absolutely nothing in Rav Schrader's background to suggest that he could start this incredible organization. Sometimes you're like, oh, this person did this and they did that, and now they're a lawyer and their dad's a lawyer, and what a big shock, like they're in real estate. You're like, okay, I'm not saying they don't deserve to be there. You look at Rav Schrader, you can be like, oh yeah, I understand why maybe he'd write a sefer or why he would be important posek, but not like why did he create this crazy organization in America. So I think that's that proactivity. It's about recognizing that sometimes there are things that you need to do and you don't wait for somebody else to do them, or you don't say, well, it's not really my problem. And I think that really ties into the education system. It ties into the way I view our young men and women who are involved with JLIC on campus. It is tied to the creation of JLIC in Israel. It's tied to really everything I try to do in life, is this concept of being proactive and the Torah true values of being proactive. And there's a difference between doing something for the sake of doing something, right? If you look at the Torah, the reason why men being proactive tends to be ineffective is because we're sort of it's impulsive. We're not actually stopping to think out why we're doing what we're doing. The women tend to be thinking out what they're doing, which is why women being proactive is more effective. If you think about Moshe Rabbeinu was probably one of the most reactive leaders. He was a very passive leader. I'm not saying he wasn't the greatest prophet of all time. I'm not saying that that's not who God chose, but as leaders go, he was pretty passive and pretty reactive. And the few times that Moshe Rabbeinu was proactive didn't end well, right? If you think about the situations, they created problems. They weren't positive. And so I think when I think about the idea of JLIC, and I think about the idea of achrayus, and I think about the idea of trying to empower young men and women to take achrayus for their lives and their Judaism in whatever format that looks like, right? We're not telling you how you have to turn out. That I think is one of the greatest messages in the Torah. I think we choose to ignore it, either because we're too reliant on midrash, or because it makes us uncomfortable to think about the fact that maybe, from a sort of existential perspective, we have that freedom, right, of the en soi versus the pour soi, that sort of, Sartrean understanding of things. I think that there's that. I think people don't like that idea. But when I think about, joking aside, Don, for anybody who's made it this far, of course I love what I do, and I think what I'm doing is very empowering and very important. And of course, when I look at what I'm able to accomplish from on high, it's very valuable. But when push comes to shove, I miss just being on campus and educating people. You know what I mean? Like, I could make that choice. I mean, now I'm too old to go to campus, but you do it because you don't have a choice in the matter. You do it because you're doing what's right, and you're doing what is important, and you don't have to enjoy it necessarily. Not every day. I don't mean, go punch a clock and be bored, but what we see is when we look at the leaders of the Jewish people throughout all Tanakh, there's no guarantee that you're going to love every second of it. You do it because you have to be proactive. You have to be involved. I have a tremendous team. We're thinking about everything. Kierkegaard said something, well, he said many brilliant things. We said that authentic faith requires decisive commitment rather than passive observation. And obviously he wasn't talking about Judaism, but I think that is something that really stays with me. It's this idea of, how am I proactively moving things forward? I'm not going to sit there and say, well, great, we're on, X number of campuses in America, we're done. Right? Should we be on a new campus? Should we close a campus? Should we be in Israel? Should we be in Australia? I don't know that we should be. We're not a franchise. I'm not going to go somewhere just because we want to be somewhere new. But I'm going to be thinking proactively. And and your wife knows that it's the same way I think about supervision. Where are we moving the needle? Are we relying on what was good last month, or are we moving things forward? And as long as we're moving it forward with sincerity and thought, then I think that, I'm not being, there's no hyperbole when I say this. I'm just quoting Rav Hirsch. We could be responsible for making sure that the next Esav is an Esav. I really believe that. And when I see the craziness of campus and the number of, Orthodox Jews who are desperately trying to find meaning and relationships and, protesting already on, October 9th against Israel with their Palestinian friends, I think that that's a reality that we have to deal with. And I think that it's not just about sitting there and whining or crying or posting in an echo chamber about these things. I think it's about doing something about it. And I think we really do. I think it's very scary. But when I think about you and Lior, I think about any number of couples, I think there's a real chance that at the very least we had a positive impact, and maybe we kept somebody from being the next Esav, because instead of being told that they were disgusting for asking a complicated question, we just were like, well, let's talk about it.
Sounds good.
I don't know if it sounds good. It sounds true.
It sounds Torah true.